This is the advice that you absolutely need. Watch this video to the end and be patient with me because this is a very important message that I must put out to everyone who has a goal or an aspiration to become a pro. There are certain skills that carry over from chapter to chapter regardless of the map that you must learn and get good at, and these skills are the reason why you see the same pros placing at the top over and over. These carryover skills are what I like to call the fundamentals of the game. What are the fundamentals of the game? This will be the first topic of today's video. Later on, I also want to address how to practice properly and also how to develop a really good intuition, which is something that carries a lot of the pros, because oftentimes when you ask the pros to explain a concept, they're unable to. And the reason is because their intuition is what carries them, not anything else. So let's talk about it. Why should we know the fundamentals of the game? What good does it do us, right? If we have a limited amount of time per day to practice, it's very important we prioritize. And so what should we prioritize? There are certain skills that give you a bigger ROI than other skills, right? And so for that reason, it's very important for us to know what are the big ROI skills and what are the skills that we should absolutely avoid and not really spend all that time with. So let's answer the golden question. What are the fundamentals of Fortnite? Aim is one of the most important skills that you must absolutely master before you can sort of worry about anything else. Like, make sure you can hit a reliable shot. Now notice I don't say hit a 180 or 190 or 200 all the time. It's like if you can trade 100 damage every time you're given an opportunity to do so, you're probably good enough. It's important not to hit nothing. Like, every time you're given an opportunity, if you can trade a good amount of damage and not hit 0 or 30, you'll be well off for sure. Like, this is good. Back in the day when Tayson was super good in his prime, his aim was super reliable. Next skill that we must talk about, which is absolutely a fundamental, is your edit accuracy. So this is something that I absolutely want you guys to focus on because this is something that you don't really care about in practice. Everyone's trying to go as fast as they can. Everyone cares about how speedy or flashy or cool they look in practice. When you're doing Raiders Piece Control map, it's really the percentage of times you mess up that matters, not really how fast you do it. Again, going back to Tayson, he was a slow builder back in the day. He was a slow editor back in the day, right? He didn't really edit that fast. The key thing was he would never miss an edit, right? And so that's what's really important. If you understand how to peek and move, then really all that matters is like, do not miss an edit. The third skill that I really want you to work on, but this is something that's very deep, this takes a long time to get really good at, and oftentimes is tied to experience, is your game sense, right? Game sense can be broken down into two sort of categories, which is fighting game sense and your grim game sense, as I like to call it. I don't really know another term for it, but essentially your off-spawn planning, your mid-game rotates, and your sort of game sense revolving around that, and your end-game game sense overall. And so, like, let's break that down, right? So fighting game sense is essentially your movement, your peaks, your trading, and your ability to know when to go in, when to go out, when to play with your team, when to sort of split up and do a pinch, and all of these things, right? And so it's really important to understand these things can take a long time to get good at, but only if you let it happen that way. One of the best ways to get better at fighting super quickly is to often refer back to the correct way to fight. So how do you know what the right way to do it? Obviously, I talk a lot about on my channel, like, you know, the concepts of fighting, but another really simple way to remember how to fight properly is to go on Twitch and watch some streamers. There is absolutely a way where you can sort of veer off to the side and build bad habits and, you know, forget to keep yourself in check. As for scrim game sense, like, if you don't have a popular scrim chord that you play in and that, you know, that offers scrims almost every day, Noble is really good in EU, Manu scrims, so Vital scrims is really good in NA. These are really good recommendations in order to get good. If you guys have other scrim chords that you want to sort of share with the community, put them down in the comments, absolutely. But, you know, scrim often. Experience is one of those things that builds really good scrim game sense, right? Some of the other concepts that I can talk about is understand the order of priorities, right? So if there is surge in your game, then you should deal with that first. You know, building positioning is really important, right? So ask yourself, like, do you want to go edge zone? Do you want to go center zone? Which is important based on the situation that you're in. Can you even go to center zone? Because oftentimes people will force center zone when it's not forceable and then die or lose a lot of mats because of it, when it would just better that game because they late rotated in to just play edge and rotate in at a later time when there's more enemy builds to use as cover, right? So it really does depend on the situation, but this is what it is, right? A lot of game sense is intuition, which is the topic we'll talk talk about later in the video, but I really want you guys to understand it's pattern recognition, right? Put it simply, if you're in a scenario, a very simple scenario where you die, it's often the case that you'll eventually learn, maybe not the first or second or third time, but eventually with enough focused reps in scrim, you will eventually learn what the mistake is and let it go. But this is actually very, very common with easy mistakes that you eventually let it go, right? Like, for example, not having a shotgun shell in your shotgun when you're fighting, and so therefore the fix would be to start reloading more frequently so that you do have a shotgun shell when you fight, so that when you're in an engagement, you actually are ready to shoot. So this is a very simple example, right? This is very easy to fix because it's very obvious what the problem is, but in more complex situations where it requires more logical thought and critical thinking, this is where the issue lies. So obviously, you know, pattern recognition only works if you actually take the time to sort of review and actually come up with the logical answer to the problem that you presented. And so, like, for example, if you're in a scrim and you keep dying endgame and it seems to be the same way, maybe you're running out of mats too soon in first moving or second moving, and you're having trouble identifying the problem, right? And so this is where oftentimes game sense will require one of two things. The first thing is usually, you know, just you identifying the issue successfully and solving it. But sometimes you'll be in a situation where you don't have the knowledge to solve it. And maybe this is a problem you get stuck at often. This is where a new perspective can help you. Either a friend or a coach or someone knowledgeable about the game can come in and review your game for you and tell you exactly what's going wrong. Because oftentimes, you know, the problem is either too complex for you to solve it, or you're just not able to figure out what's going wrong, right? Regardless, these are all the problems that come up with game sense when you're actually trying to solve them. And what's important to recognize is, like, yes, it's a slow process, and yes, it's very easy to solve the simple stuff, right? I genuinely believe most of you guys can solve the simple stuff yourself. Like, hey, I'm too low here and I should have healed instead of fighting. Like, that's a very basic issue to solve. But like, when it gets a little bit more complex, when it gets to like end game or mid game rotates, and this is where it starts to become a little bit, you know, troublesome, this is where you'll probably need a lot more critical thinking to solve the issue, and a lot more logical thought, in my personal opinion. So before ending off this first section, I do want to let you in on a little bit of a secret. This will help you greatly in terms of trying to analyze, hey, did I do this right, did I do this wrong, and like, how should I fix it? Whenever you're VOD reviewing, try your absolute best to not fall into the trap of results-based thinking, because Fortnite is absolutely a risk-reward game. Sometimes you do take the risk that you're supposed to and it doesn't work out. Just because you lost that game doesn't mean you shouldn't do it again in a future game. For example, if you're low mats in first moving, second moving, and you try to go for something bold, maybe you could have done it slightly differently, sure, but it's very important to recognize that, like, hey, it's much better to go for something when you're low mats than it's just not to go for something at all, right? Because sometimes you did do the right move, but it still fails. This is not a large majority of cases, but it's important to recognize when this is, and it's important to understand, hey, like, I took the risk that was necessary, I did what I needed to do, and it didn't work out. Understand that risk is a big part of Fortnite, and it should absolutely be used, right? So take your decisions with risk reward in mind. For the second topic of this video, I do want to talk about your mentality when you practice. It's important to understand that a lot of people give the advice of, hey, I want to be patient, I really think it's a long-term game, and you know, even I've given this advice to myself, but what I do to my students is I tell them, like, look, like, although you should be patient, here's something that you should know. Problem with being patient and too patient at times is that there's no sense of urgency. Now, this is the key lesson of today's video, is the urgency of your practice will lead to great results. Like, have you ever wondered why it's so hard to play solo arena at times? You have to recognize, like, this is not some to-do list that I'm giving you. This is not some sort of chore that you have to do. Let's quickly compare, you know, going pro in Fortnite with a very simple example, which is how to get good grades on a math test, which is, you know, very similar in the regard of, like, you're getting good at something, okay? Your teacher gives you a practice set of problems, which is very, very similar to the test, and often it's actually the exact same thing as the test, except they give you, like, different numbers, for example, to truly test whether you know the problems and whether you can apply the concepts, you know, that you learned in class. And so, like, the best way to get a really, really, really good performance on your math test is to not actually just complete the math test that you got as a sort of practice sample set, right? Don't just go through the motions. You do it, and then you don't stop practicing until you get every question right without looking at the answers. And then after you can actually complete the problems, you're supposed to redo them and make sure you can actually do them within the sort of supposed allotted time that you're given during the math test, right? These are the steps that you do in order to get a good grade. Like, school is actually really easy, right? In that regard. It's only really easy if you actually check whether you're ready. So that's the key thing, right? Like, make sure you're ready. The lesson that we've learned is quite simply checking whether you're actually ready for the tournaments, right? It's like, if you're losing every scrim, like, what do you think's gonna happen in the tournament? That's like doing the math practice set problems, getting every question wrong, and then going to sleep peacefully somehow. The third and arguably the most important topic of this video is about intuition. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what intuition is, let me sort of explain it to you two different ways. First, the definition of intuition. Intuition is simply knowing what to do without actually consciously thinking about it, and this is actually made only possible by pattern recognition from past experiences, usually a similar past experience, okay? So this is very important. Before we move on, I just want to quickly explain why intuition is such a valuable skill, especially in a game like Fortnite. Number one reason is absolutely speed, right? When you consciously think about every single decision and why you're making the decision in game, you're struggling with speed. You're trying to do things too slow. You're hesitating. You're doubting yourself. It's not good. You might be second guessing yourself. It's very important. You need speed in a game like Fortnite, especially when it comes to end game and even some mid game rotates, honestly, right? And so it's very important that you need to come to a feeling, not a logical thought in this scenario, especially when in performance like a tournament, right? You need speed at times, and it's very, very valuable to come up with a decent decision with speed rather than hesitate on the really, really good decision or the correct answer theoretically. If you've ever wondered why we practice or scrim at all, this is exactly why. We're trying to create those memories or past experience so that in the future, when we go into the tournament and a similar memory arises, what do you think we're going to do? We've learned our lesson. We don't like losing. We've lost 3 times, 4 times in a row in the past to this exact same mistake. And usually I would hope that we don't make the same mistake in the tournament. Another way to think about intuition is an example. So if you guys still don't understand what intuition is, not to worry. Here's a great example of intuition in our day-to-day life. When you're walking, do you actually think about left foot forward, right foot forward, left foot forward, right foot forward? No, you don't. You don't. You just don't think of it that way, right? You think of just, hey, I need to go from point A to point B, because in our head it's modularized, right? And we thought about it when we were kids, like, okay, how do I actually walk? For sure, we thought about it then. So in practice, in getting better at it, you need to think about it consciously. But when you're actually good at it already, you don't think about it anymore. It becomes intuition. You have to sort of consciously think while you're practicing. This is why I oftentimes suggest to review and reflect and think about what you did wrong and try to figure out what you did wrong, because I think it's really important. Because, like, for example, if I were to sit in the call with you and try to like tell you exactly what you did wrong and I just take over the whole process for you, you don't have to do any of the thinking, which is oftentimes somewhat, painful, and people don't like to do it. People are lazy. I totally get it. But it's important to recognize this is the process that actually sort of puts it into memory for you, right? So trying to think of what went wrong, if you are able to figure it out yourself, you'll probably remember it easier. Make sense? So like, why do you think the teachers don't give you the answer in math class? It's the exact same reason. They're trying to get it sort of locked in your memory. And if you have the process of figuring it out and you get it successfully, you'll probably remember it much easier during the test. And in this case, during your scrim, I want you to figure it out for yourself, because the critical thinking process is really important for remembering it later on in the game. Sometimes when I'm coaching, I like to ask a lot of questions rather than just tell them straight up what the answer is, right? I like to lead or guide them to the answer, not just give them the answer. And so this is really important, guys. This is what intuition is, right? And so it's important to recognize what intuition is, because if you, if you're thinking about the pros, when they're going into a very, very crazy situation, like an end game clutch, they're not there thinking like, oh my God, what's the risk reward of this situation? Like, and what should I do here? And, sometimes they won't even think about like anything. They'll just be locked in. Right? That's what locked in means, right? The adrenaline is rushing. They don't have time to think consciously. All they're doing is referring back to their past experiences in their head, using that to come up with decisions, and that's it. Like, quite literally, that's it. Like, even myself, someone who I would argue is more logical, if I'm in a solo clutch situation and I'm trying to clutch it up for my team, I don't think. In game, I don't think. In practice, I might try to consciously think, because I think that's necessary for building that intuition faster. But in the tournament, I just go locked in, right? That's really, really important to recognize. Don't try to overthink in tournaments. I've tried it myself in the past. It is absolutely not a great idea if you don't have the time to come up with the decisions, right? Obviously, in mid game, Mid game, coming up with rotates and stuff, sure, because you have the time for it, right? But in end game, you absolutely don't have time for it. Some rotates, honestly, you don't have time for it. Let's say you need surge, right? You need a lot of surge. Spend all that time trying to get all that AR damage or the surge damage in general, and then later on you have like 10 seconds to figure out your mid game rotate, and that's it. Like in that case, you have to refer to your intuition, which is oftentimes IGLs and coaches are not the exact same thing, because coaches sometimes need more time to come up with the correct answer, whereas IGLs are really, really good with coming up with an answer on the spot that's half decent or 80% good. And that is way more valuable than coming up with the actual correct answer, which kind of leads me into the last subtopic. Be a little bit more confident about your calls. It's okay if you don't get the number one correct answer. I'm not asking you to actually do that. You just need to have good quality decisions, and that's it, right? Sometimes, honestly, if you make a bad decision but both of you guys are in on it, it can work, right? So just understand, whatever play you make, just make it together with confidence, and most of the time it will actually work, which is why sometimes when you VOD review pros, they'll do something theoretically wrong, but it still works out because they're so confident in their play. Like they'll go in on it together, right? And so that's key. That's very, very important. Do not sort of be split on decisions. There's a whole reason you have an IGL. Listen to the IGL. Obviously, the fragger can make a call here or there, but it's important to just stick to one call and be on it 100%. Either way, guys, sort of a different video here for the sake of actually helping you guys genuinely, right? And for the guys that actually care about this the most and actually care about competitive and care about improving and actually, have a goal of becoming a pro one day, this video will absolutely be the resource that you need to get better. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys next time.